Marcus had been at the airport for 15 years, which meant he'd learned to recognize the exact moment when someone was about to misjudge him. It usually happened in the first 3 seconds. They'd roll up to his dispatch station, see the wheelchair, and their eyes would do this thing. A quick flicker down and away, like they were checking a box on a form they'd already filled out. He'd learned not to mind it. The airport ran because people like him noticed what people like them overlooked. That was the mathematics of it. Visibility was a liability. Invisibility was a kind of protection. He'd gotten his coffee that morning the same way he got it every morning, up at 4:47 a.m., shower while his son Marcus Jr. was still sleeping, into the kitchen where his daughter Aliana had left a note about her college scholarship application being due, the kind of note that meant she was stressed but didn't want to say it out loud. He'd written back, "You've already won. The paperwork is just them catching up." He wasn't sure if that was true, but it was the kind of thing fathers said when the real truth was too heavy to carry before sunrise. The dispatch center was quiet at 5:30 a.m. It was always quiet before the world needed to move. Marcus wheeled himself to his custom station, a setup that had taken him 3 years to refine, with the controls positioned exactly where his hands could reach them without strain, monitors arranged so he could see flight plans, weather patterns, and emergency protocols all at once. The wheelchair wasn't separate from the work, it was part of the infrastructure. He'd learned to move through the station with the kind of efficiency that made every motion count. No wasted energy, no unnecessary gestures, just the essential mechanics of keeping aircraft safe in the sky. By 6:15 a.m., the first pilots were checking in. Rodriguez from the cargo run to Memphis, Chen from the early commuter flight to Atlanta. They greeted him the way they always did, with respect that didn't acknowledge his chair because it didn't need to. They knew him. They knew his voice on the radio meant their flight plan had been checked 3 times. They knew his concern meant something. That was worth something. That was everything, actually, when you understood how the world worked. The morning moved through its routines. He coordinated with maintenance, confirmed fuel deliveries, monitored weather systems developing over the Gulf. By 8:30 a.m., the airport was in its mid-morning rhythm, busy but manageable, the way he liked it. That was when the helicopter arrived. Marcus saw it first on the radar, a new signature he didn't recognize. Then he heard the commotion in the hallway outside the dispatch center, people talking louder than usual, someone laughing in that particular way that meant something important had happened, money arriving probably, or someone famous. He didn't look up from his monitors. The helicopter would need to follow the same protocols as everything else that flew out of this airport. That was the point of having protocols. She came through the door with 3 people trailing her like satellites. She was maybe 50, expensive clothes, the kind of confidence that came from inheriting wealth or making it early enough that you'd forgotten what uncertainty felt like. Marcus recognized the type. He'd learned to recognize types in 15 years. She didn't glance at him as she entered. She looked past him, over him, through him, the way people looked at furniture. "I need to establish operations here," she said to the room generally. "New charter service, luxury clientele, state-of-the-art helicopter. I'll need terminal space, hangar access, and whatever administrative support you have." She said, administrative support, the way someone might say janitorial services, a thing that existed but didn't require her sustained attention. The airport manager, Tom, came over immediately. "Absolutely. This is fantastic for us. Let me show you around, and we'll get your paperwork started." Tom glanced at Marcus. "Marcus can help coordinate your flight schedules with our dispatch protocols." She turned to Marcus for the first time. Her eyes did the thing, the flicker, the calculation that happened in the space between seeing and acknowledging. "I'll need someone competent," she said. "No offense, but I'm bringing in my own logistics coordinator. Someone with aviation experience." Marcus nodded. He'd heard this before too. "I've been coordinating flight operations at this airport for 15 years, he said quietly. "I can help you understand how we manage traffic, how the protocols work, any safety considerations specific to your operation." She smiled, The kind of smile that came with a slight tilt of the head, the smile people gave to children who were trying very hard. "I'm sure you do a great job with, the general operations. But helicopter charter is different. Luxury clientele. High-stakes logistics. I need someone who can handle that level of detail." Marcus had felt this before too. The weight of being told that your competence wasn't competent enough, that your 15 years of learning meant nothing because she could see in 3 seconds what you actually were. "I understand," he said, "but I'm still available if you need anything." She was already turning away. "Tom, show me the hangar. I want to see what kind of infrastructure you have. My helicopter cost $12 million. I need to be sure you can handle that." Marcus watched them leave. He turned back to his monitors. There was a fuel delivery coming in at 9:45. Chen's flight was reporting light turbulence over Georgia. The weather system over the Gulf was developing faster than expected. These were the things that mattered. These were the things that kept people alive. Everything else was noise. But he found himself paying attention in a different way once her operation began. The files started appearing on his system. Her flight manifests, her maintenance reports, her coordination with the new logistics coordinator she'd brought in. A man named Derek, who had the kind of resume that made sense to people who hired based on LinkedIn profiles instead of actual competence. Everything looked fine on the surface. Everything was fine until you started noticing the patterns that shouldn't exist. The first thing Marcus noticed was inconsistent maintenance reporting. The helicopter was logging flight hours that didn't match the maintenance intervals reported. It was subtle, the kind of thing that would take someone with 15 years of experience in aviation safety to spot. Someone who'd spent 15 years learning that disaster wasn't usually dramatic. It was usually the result of small oversights that accumulated until they became unavoidable. He pulled the files again. Yes, the numbers didn't match. Maintenance windows were being skipped, not by much, just enough to stay within a certain gray zone where regulations weren't technically violated, but safety margins were eroding. Marcus wheeled himself into Tom's office. "I need to flag something about the helicopter operation," he said. Tom looked up from his desk. "Yeah? What's wrong?" "The maintenance reporting is inconsistent with the flight hours they're logging. I think they might be extending intervals beyond what's safe." Tom leaned back. "Did you talk to her about it?" "I wanted to check with you first." "Marcus, she brought in her own coordinator. She's got her own protocols. I don't want to step on her toes. She's good for this airport. Let's not make assumptions." Marcus wheeled back to the dispatch center. He understood. He'd understood the moment she walked through the door. His job was to manage the protocol for aircraft that the airport had hired him to manage. Her aircraft was her responsibility. If she wanted to run it into the ground, that was her choice. But he kept watching, because that was what 15 years of dispatch work did to you. It made you unable to stop watching. It made you see patterns even when you didn't want to, even when noticing was painful. The errors accumulated. Another inconsistency in the fuel documentation. A flight plan filed with incorrect weight calculations. A maintenance schedule that had been altered and then re-altered. Each one individually could be explained. Collectively, they painted a picture of an operation running just outside the margins of safe operation. The kind of margins that existed for exactly one reason, so that when something unexpected happened, there was room to recover. Marcus made a decision. He drafted a formal report documenting the inconsistencies, the safety concerns, and the regulatory implications. He sent it to Tom and to the FAA safety coordinator. He did it carefully, professionally, without making accusations. Just documentation, just facts. Tom called him that afternoon. "Marcus, I got your report. Look, I appreciate the diligence, but she's got her own safety officer. If there's an issue, he'll catch it. You're stepping into territory that's not really your department." "I'm the dispatch coordinator," Marcus said. "It's my job to identify safety concerns." "I know, and I'm telling you to let this one go." Marcus let it go, or he appeared to let it go. In reality, he kept watching. He kept documenting. He kept everything in files that lived on his personal system, which was the kind of careful habit that people who'd been underestimated their entire lives tended to develop. 2 weeks after she arrived, something changed. The new logistics coordinator, Derek, sent out a flight plan that didn't match their helicopter's actual capabilities. It was the kind of error that wouldn't matter if nothing went wrong. But Marcus had learned 15 years ago that you had to operate your protocols as if something would definitely go wrong, because it would. He called Derek directly. "I'm seeing an issue with the flight plan you filed. The weight calculation doesn't match the passenger manifest plus fuel load. It's 340 pounds over max certified weight." There was a pause. "I'll talk to the pilot. We'll adjust the manifest. You need to file an amended plan before the flight leaves." "Yeah, I know how this works." But the amended plan never came. Marcus watched the helicopter taxi out at 2:15 p.m. with what he knew was an overweight configuration. He had 3 options. He could do nothing, let it go, like Tom had asked him to, respect the boundary that had been very clearly drawn. He could file an emergency report and ground the flight, which would embarrass her, make him look like he was overstepping, confirm the narrative that he was the kind of person who didn't understand his place. Or he could document it, add it to his file, and hope that the pilot was better at managing risk than the people coordinating the flight. He documented it. The helicopter was gone for 4 hours. It was carrying 4 executives from an investment firm to a corporate retreat in Savannah. 4 people whose lives depended on the margins that Marcus had been watching erode. By 6:15 p.m., they were back. No emergency, no incident, just a successful flight to people who would never know how close they'd gotten to something they didn't have the knowledge to understand. But at 6:30 p.m., she came through the dispatch center door. This time her eyes went directly to Marcus. "I heard you filed a report about my operation," she said. "I documented some safety inconsistencies. I don't appreciate being questioned by someone who doesn't understand high-end charter operations. I've been doing this for 20 years. I know what I'm doing." Marcus felt the familiar weight, the sensation of being dismissed by someone whose confidence was a kind of armor. "I was just trying to flag. You flagged it. I appreciate that, but I've got this covered. My operations coordinator is experienced. My pilots are experienced. And I don't need someone in a wheelchair deciding that he knows better than the actual professionals involved." She said it quietly. She said it professionally. She said it the way someone might state a fact. And then she left. Marcus finished his shift at 10 p.m. He drove home to the apartment where his son was waiting with homework questions, and his daughter had called to say she didn't get the scholarship, but she was okay. She'd figure out other options. He told her what he told her every time something didn't work out the way she expected. "You're smarter than this. The world just hasn't caught up yet." He didn't know if that was true either, but it was what fathers said. 3 weeks after she arrived, the weather system that had been developing over the Gulf became a real storm. Not a hurricane, not quite an emergency, but the kind of weather that separated competent operations from operations that were running on margins too thin to absorb deviation. Marcus watched the reports come in, rain moving across the coast, wind speeds increasing, a flight corridor that was going to be affected by nightfall. At 3:45 p.m., she was scheduled to depart for Miami with 6 passengers. A corporate group, probably, someone important. The kind of people who paid for the certainty that they would arrive at their destination on time. Marcus pulled up her flight plan. Miami, direct route. The same route that would take the helicopter directly into the developing storm system. The flight plan had been filed assuming clear skies and normal conditions. It had not been amended for the weather advisory that Marcus had received from the National Weather Service at 2:30 p.m. He called Derek. "You need to amend the flight plan. There's a weather system that's going to impact your route. It's not in the flight corridor. We'll be clear. The advisory I just received says the system is expanding. I'd recommend a southern routing. We'll be fine. The pilot can see what he's seeing." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You should amend the plan." I appreciate the concern, Marcus, but this isn't your call. Derek hung up. Marcus sat in his dispatch center with his monitors showing the weather patterns developing in real time. He could see what was coming. He'd learned to see it in 15 years of managing aircraft in dangerous spaces. The storm was going to move north, the flight corridor was going to be affected, and the helicopter was going to launch into it with a weight calculation that didn't match its actual capacity and a fuel load that assumed a direct route. He had a choice. He could file an emergency flight restriction, ground the aircraft, be the person who stopped her from operating. He could be the disabled dispatcher who decided he knew better than she did, or he could let it go, the way everyone had asked him to, and hope that her 20 years of experience were enough to overcome the margins he'd watched eroding. He made a call to the airport manager. "Tom, I need to escalate a safety concern about the helicopter operation." "Marcus, we've talked about this. They're launching into developing weather with an amended flight plan that doesn't account for the system advisory. The weight calculation is over max certified. The routing assumes conditions that won't exist in 20 minutes. Tom was quiet. "Let me call her." But she didn't answer. By 4:15 p.m., the helicopter was taxiing. By 4:20 p.m., it was in the air, heading toward Miami, toward the weather system that was developing faster than the forecasts had predicted. Marcus tracked it on his radar. He monitored the weather system simultaneously. He watched the two trajectories converge. The helicopter was 22 minutes into flight when the National Weather Service updated the advisory. The storm had intensified faster than expected. Wind speeds were higher. The system was moving north. It was going to intersect with the helicopter's flight path in approximately 14 minutes. Marcus had the radio frequency open. He could hear the pilot communicating with the Miami Air Traffic Control Center. Everything sounded normal, professional, under control. The helicopter was 13 minutes from the convergence point when the weather hit harder than expected. Marcus heard the pilot's voice change. Not panic, not yet, but that particular quality of careful attention that came when a situation was deteriorating faster than the projections suggested. "Miami approach, helicopter 77 Alpha. We're experiencing significant turbulence. The weather ahead looks worse than reported." "Roger that, 77 Alpha. We're monitoring. You're clear for routing around the system to the south." "That's a longer route. We don't have the fuel for diversion." Silence. The kind of silence that came when people realized they were in the middle of making a decision that mattered in ways they couldn't go back from. 77 Alpha, what's your current altitude? 2,000 feet. Approaching the system boundary now. Marcus was watching the radar. The helicopter was flying into a corner. The weather system had expanded south faster than expected. The only clear route out was north. Back toward the airport, back toward Marcus's jurisdiction, back toward the place where someone had been watching this disaster accumulate for 3 weeks. "Miami, we're being forced north, requesting return to Origin Airport. Copy that, 77 Alpha. You're clear to return to Origin. Stand by for routing." The helicopter turned. It was now heading back toward Marcus's airport with a fuel situation that was getting tighter by the minute, and a weight calculation that meant it was consuming fuel faster than the original flight plan had accounted for. Marcus had the radio open. He had the weather data. He had the fuel calculations running in his head, the way his mind had learned to run them over 15 years of managing aircraft in emergency situations. The helicopter would have approximately 11 minutes of fuel when it reached the airport. The crosswind was already running at 35 knots. The rain was going to reduce visibility to about a quarter mile. This was the moment. This was what happened when systems broke down, when margins eroded, when competence was dismissed by confidence. This was what 15 years of careful protocol looked like when it mattered. 77 Alpha, this is ground dispatch, Marcus said. His voice was quiet, professional, the voice of someone who'd been doing this for 15 years. "I'm going to coordinate your approach. Visibility is 1/4 mile and decreasing. Crosswind 37 knots from the northeast. You're number 1 for landing. Clear runway 28. Approach from the northeast. Descend at 300 feet per minute. I'll call your descent intervals. Roger. Dispatch. What's my fuel status? Marcus pulled the calculations. You have approximately 10 minutes to touchdown based on your consumption rate. You're going to make it, but you need to be clean and stable on approach. The helicopter came in hard. The crosswind was fighting it. The rain was making the runway lights look like smeared neon in the distance. But the pilot, who'd spent 15 years flying safely, who understood margins, who knew how to respect the protocols that other people treated as suggestions, put it down clean. 250 feet of runway. The helicopter rolled and stopped and sat there on the pavement while the rain fell around it and the wind tried to push it sideways. Emergency vehicles were there in seconds, not because anyone was hurt, just because everything about that approach had told everyone in the tower that they'd just watched something that could have gone very wrong. The kind of emergency that existed in the space between the decision and the outcome. She was out of the helicopter in minutes. She came straight through the rain toward the dispatch center. Her expensive clothes were soaked. Her certainty was still there, but it had changed. It had the texture of something that had almost broken. She stood in front of Marcus's station. For a moment she didn't speak. She just looked at him. Really looked. The way she hadn't looked at him when she arrived. You saw it, she said. You saw it coming. I saw the patterns, Marcus said. I documented them. You filed a report. I did. Tom said you were overstepping. He said I had my own coordinators. Yes. She sat down in one of the chairs near his station, just sat down, like the weight of what had almost happened had made standing impossible. My logistics coordinator cut corners, she said. I was told, but I didn't listen. I was too confident. I thought I knew my operation well enough that I didn't need to question his numbers. And you, she looked up at him. You saw it from the beginning. You flagged it 3 weeks ago. I told you that you didn't understand high-end charter operations. Marcus was quiet. He'd learned to be quiet in moments like this, to let people arrive at their own understanding without pushing them toward it. Why didn't you ground the flight? She asked. It wasn't my authority. You could have done it. You could have filed an emergency report, cited the safety concerns, forced a shutdown. I could have, Marcus agreed. But then I would have been the disabled dispatcher who didn't understand that your operation was different. I would have been overstepping. I would have been the problem. Instead, I documented everything and made sure you knew what the concerns were. What you did with that information was your choice. She nodded. She understood. The thing about almost dying was that it made understanding unavoidable. My pilots, she said. The 4 executives. That could have been... It wasn't, Marcus said. Because you had a good pilot. Because when the margins got thin, the pilot knew how to fly outside them. Because you came back to the airport where someone had been paying attention all along. She sat for a long time. Outside, the rain was beginning to ease. The weather system was moving through, the helicopter was being inspected, the passengers were being transported, the emergency protocols that Tom and Marcus had established 15 years ago were moving through their practiced motions. What's your name? She asked. Marcus. Marcus, I'm going to need a new logistics coordinator. Someone who understands the protocols here, someone who sees the patterns, someone who isn't afraid to flag when something's wrong. Marcus felt something shift, not forgiveness, not really, but recognition, the kind that came when someone finally saw what they'd been looking at the whole time. I can help with that, he said. She left the dispatch center that evening, and Marcus finished his shift the way he finished every shift. He wheeled himself to his car. He drove home through the evening that had almost been a tragedy. He found his son with his homework and his daughter on the phone from college, and he didn't tell them what had happened. He didn't need to. He'd learned a long time ago that the invisible work was invisible precisely because it happened in the spaces between dramatic moments. The real heroism was in the 14 years before the emergency, in the careful attention to detail, in the willingness to watch for patterns that other people missed. 3 months later, Marcus was promoted. Not just because she'd asked for him, but because Tom had finally seen what everyone who worked in the tower already knew, that Marcus had been managing the most complex operation at the airport while everyone else was watching the skies. The new title was Safety Director. The raise was significant. The wheelchair was still there, still essential, still the architecture through which he moved and worked. But more importantly, she started listening. She brought in protocols that matched what Marcus had suggested 3 weeks before the emergency. She hired a logistics coordinator who understood that safety wasn't a suggestion. She learned that expertise didn't announce itself. It whispered in the moments before disaster, and if you were smart enough to listen, it saved your life. Marcus's daughter got a job at the airport after she finished college. His son decided he wanted to study aviation safety, and Marcus kept watching, because that was what 15 years of experience had taught him. You didn't stop watching. You didn't stop seeing patterns. You didn't let arrogance make you comfortable. You stayed alert. You documented everything, and when the moment came, and it always did, you were ready. The helicopter operation became one of the safest charter services in the region. She won awards for her safety protocols. She gave interviews about the importance of listening to ground operations. She never once mentioned the disabled dispatcher who'd flagged the problems, but she didn't need to. The people who understood safety understood where her wisdom had come from. And Marcus? Marcus had learned something that most people never did. He'd learned that the people worth respecting weren't the ones who arrived with confidence. They were the ones who arrived with curiosity, who were willing to be wrong, who could see expertise even when it came from unexpected places, even when it came from a man in a wheelchair who nobody had bothered to look at when they first walked through the door. If you're watching from a city where aviation matters, where safety margins are part of your professional world, comment and tell me where you're from. Where do you work that requires you to notice patterns nobody else sees? Have you ever done good work that went unrecognized until the moment it mattered most? Tell me your story in the comments. Has someone ever dismissed your expertise before you got a chance to prove it? Single dads in the aerospace and logistics industry, I want to hear from you. Are you working in spaces where your competence saves lives? Tell me your city in the comments. Tell me how you navigate being underestimated in high-stakes environments. What's the most invisible thing you've done that actually mattered, the work that nobody noticed until the second it became essential? Comment if you've lived that experience. Have you ever seen character matter more than circumstances? Have you watched someone overcome limitation by becoming irreplaceable through competence? Tell me about it in the comments. Single dads with stories of safety work, security protocols, expertise that protected others. I want to hear from you. Send us your story. Include your city. Tell us how you navigated being overlooked until you became essential. Know a single father who kept watching, kept documenting, kept staying alert while others were sleeping. Know someone whose invisible work turned out to be the most important work in the room. That's a story we want to tell. Comment below. Tell us his city. Tell us what he saw before anyone else did. What would it take for your competence to finally be recognized? What kind of moment does it take for the world to stop dismissing you and start listening? Comment your answer. Comment if you've lived this.